All right. Hey, everyone. So depending on when my video on the Catholic apologist Kim, I can't remember her last name right now. I think it's Embers. Whenever her video goes up, depending on that, you will have seen that I mentioned a special guest. This is the special guest. This is my friend Anissa. She's here to talk to me about LGBTQ issues inside a Christian context. So she has watched the videos that I put up. She has opinions on them. She has questions for me, but I would like her to introduce herself. You give me your background, kind of what qualifies you to even talk about Christianity, what qualifies you to talk about the LGBTQ, and where do you think we disagree or agree on any of this stuff?
Okay. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
First off, you mentioned, what gives authority or credence, and I think that right off the bat, anybody who looks for that validation, it is religion is for the people. So as far as what gives me credence is that it is part of the human experience, and most of it has a religion or a sense of a higher power, and with it a higher purpose, and they look for some guidance for aspects of their lives. And in this case, we're talking LGBTQ, monogamy, polyamory, Catholicism, atheists, what have you. Everyone's looking for some type of moral direction. Yeah, we look as, religion and identity is part of the human condition, not part of any type of religious context or codex in and of itself. So monogamy, polyamory, asexual, we can put that. Protestant, Catholic, atheist, it's all part of under human condition in some type of relevant guidance. So as far as anything for authority, we have these differences of interpretations. And
If you don't mind me asking, what religion, if any, are you currently?
I am not. I am not religious. I was raised in a Protestant household.
Okay.
I was very ingrained into that and grew up in a culture that was highly Roman Catholic. And so even outside of a church or synagogue or place of worship, you are surrounded by religion. You are surrounded by its teachings, whether or not you personally agree with any of them. They are part of your life.
And for my audience, specifically for my audience, we used to be neighbors, so we've known each other for well over 30 years. Anyway, just let them, a little insight for them. Okay, so what about on the LGBTQ side? Do you have a place that you fall either on the spectrum when it comes to gender, when it comes to sexuality? Do you have a different perspective than mine?
Yes. So as far as sexual activity, it is bisexual. That, however, is the engagement or desire to engage in those acts with a same-sex or different-sex person. When somebody, as far as to attraction, or who they feel is identifying, those are two different things. So being transgender and being bisexual or being straight or is what they call cisgender, I feel are actually different things.
If you don't mind me going back a little bit, and if this is sharing too much, let me know and I'll cut it out. But you used to identify as polyamorous. Do you still identify that way?
Yes. The concept of, you break down the definition of polyamorous as many love. Polyamorous in itself is not promiscuous sexuality, whether it be with homosexual or heterosexual.
Would you say that you ascribe to ethical non-monogamy?
Absolutely.
I know you had some questions for me. We are, just for those wondering, this may or may not be part of the series talking about Trent Horn and Father Casey, but as the lead up to this video, we did both watch the Father Casey and Trent Horn videos, and then Anissa watched two of my commentary videos. I don't know how much of them she watched. So I know you had some questions there. Is there anything on that topic of LGBTQ outreach in Christianity and Catholicism, or from your perspective, your own personal experience that you'd like to address? You have an open floor.
That's a dangerous thing to give me. So going back to something Father Casey said that I admired, but I don't think it may not have come off. The reason I admired it may not have been what he intended, where they go into, it's not what they say, it's what they don't say. That may or not be an interpretation of whether or not any type of homosexual behavior is. Trent does a little bit worse of a concept of separating behavior and identity of it or desire.
So that's one of the things that I was chastising Trent Horn about, and I do have to apologize for the way that I did it. I already said it. I'm not going to take back what I said, that it comes off as homophobic, because I've talked to enough people in the community who have said that he comes off as homophobic. Do you, before I say what I'm going to say, did you feel that it came off as homophobic either in his gestures or in his wording?
So something that people a lot of do on an unconscious level is the verbiage that they use starts changing to where the adjectives that they use or even the way their pattern of speech changes based on their own opinions sometimes. And it can be really telling. You can just kind of see where someone's going as their commentary with how they are describing certain things and the labels that they put on.
So do you think I was out of line by sensing or by voicing a kind of a spidey sense of homophobia? Or do you think that there was something there and I was correct in addressing that in my videos?
I think Trent Horn follows under the very common notion of you fear what you don't know, and therefore I don't want to say hate what you don't know, but you react negatively to what you don't know because it is unfamiliar. So because it is unknown, it becomes this thing that cannot be tolerated because it cannot be understood by him. Therefore, it cannot be tolerated by him.
No, I don't know this. I don't know if that is an act that he puts on for his apologetics. I have become very doubtful of apologetics in my later years as I've studied more and more theology, or if that's actually something that's part of him. I'm not able to tell if that is him presenting a strong emotional case to his audience that already would judge him if he came out too positively on those subjects, or if he honestly does have a problem with the LGBTQ as a person, not just theologically, but if that's a personal stance that he has that's outside of his theological understanding of things.
It's possible either way, but it always comes back to, the things that they preach positively of love thy neighbor, judge not, no one, remove the mote in your own eye before the speck of your neighbor's. They seem to only move that as it works in them. Oh, I love you. I hate this sin.
So I mentioned this in a video that hasn't come out yet. As someone who has been friends with the LGBT community and was welcomed into that community when the rest of the world was not welcoming to me. I was a wimpy kid. I was picked on. I dressed in all black. I had, piercings and blue hair. So, I hung out with the community that looked the same. As
you dressed like that, as you presented that persona, that was you. That wasn't a costume, correct? Like that was what you chose to wear?
That was just me. Yeah, I started. So in a video that will be coming up, I do talk about this, which is I really liked Beetlejuice when I was a little kid, and I decided to wear all black. And on that same day, I had my first real interaction with what I can call the callousness of the world. My mother had already died, and it happened to be Mother's Day. I wasn't wearing all black because it was Mother's Day. I just thought, like I said, I really thought Lydia Dietz was awesome, and I wanted to attract that kind of woman to myself. Mind you, I'm like in 4th grade, okay? But the teacher has me take a photo for Mother's Day 4th grade. And my mother had just died. And I'm like, I'm not taking this photo. Like, are you nuts? She's like, well, if you don't take the photo, you're going to fail. Like, just straight out, you'll fail the whole class.
With no context, with no understanding.
No understanding. And so I talked to the class, like in the class, she said, well, why don't you want to do this? I said, well, because my mother's dead. And that spread throughout the class and maybe even throughout the school. And the next day I got jumped and I ended up in the hospital. So from that point onward, I no longer identified with the normies. I didn't.
Did you feel like that was just what's the point of conforming if this is the consequence?
Yeah, pretty much it. The fact that the people who were doing this were Christians and identified as Christians and would talk about their Christianity, even in that young of an age, also made it that much worse. And then that their parents, so what their parents told their kids, and I can understand why a parent would say this now at my age, but at that time I was like, well, that's insulting. They told the kids that I was a liar because parents don't die. So in an attempt to comfort their own children, they made my life a living hell. Yeah, for the next 5 years.
So that reads to me that in order to avoid having their own hard conversations with their children at home, it is easier to lie, to change a narrative, to make it easier on you, to make it simpler for it to be someone else's problem. In this case, another child's. How familiar does that sound in any ever given circumstances, whether it's a fourth grader or a 40-year-old man behind a pulpit? Makes it easier for them, their narrative.
It is way too familiar, and it's why I walked away from the church for so long. Because as I started hanging out with and identifying with more and more, let's call them rebels, I got to see how people who called themselves Christian treated these people. I've been with groups who had rocks thrown at us, who've been spit on, who were called the N-word, who were called the F-slur, not by a small group of people, by a large group of people. There was one friend of mine who the entire school, after class, I say the entire school, who knows, went to attack him because he was different. And me, at that time, having been on the football team, I had the choice of helping them destroy this kid or helping him. And me, being an insane person, chose to help him. So it was me and him against kids who were throwing rocks at him, who were trying to fight him. And we went to a hill that was next to the school. And I don't know how many people we were throwing punches with, but his mom drives up in a car and says, get in. And we run in there and we run into the car and we kind of escape from the area. And me and this guy were great friends for the rest of that year. And his mother, loved me. And
so
that was my first interaction with Christian hate, let's put it that way.
There is no hate like Christian love.
And again, I don't know how many
Christian
kids.
moral.
That's a perspective of a seventh grader, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how many kids it actually was, but yeah.
You have the groupthink mentality of no other than middle school age boys. So that actually is a really good example of you are pulling this pool of children who are taught to be Christ-like, that are taught to be in a certain set of moral standards that is supposedly the golden standard of the human nature. And in order for you to have what society still calls the correct decision to go against that, you had to insert what you know as the moral thing to do. So how is doing the right thing going against the right people?
Let me say this from an adult perspective, and it's a very different perspective from being in the situation. In the situation, what was right and wrong seemed black and white. As an adult, looking back, I chose the druggy kid over the football players and the all A students. And I don't know if I would like my son or daughter now running off with a kid who did drugs to a parent's car where the parent didn't have an issue, but knew about the drug use and didn't take the steps to make it negative. Put it that way. So hold on. As an adult, I have a very different perspective. But as a kid going through that, it didn't make me want to. Like I said, I had already been picked on. I had already gone through my trauma, and I could have erased all that negative history and sided with the cool kids, with the popular kids, and fixed my reputation. But just from pure experience, seeing how they treated me and seeing how this kid had treated me, and he treated me great. He never treated me bad. He was a person who I liked. I chose him over popularity because in my eyes as a child, he was not only the person who was in the right, but he was someone I could identify with as a fellow outsider. As an adult, I do think I did the right thing in defending him. I don't think I did the right thing by running off with him and his mom into a unstable situation. So while I appreciate the good part that I did, I did not understand the risk to future problems that I was also entering into.
When you bring up future, I am not a proponent of fate or predestined. In any situation, how many times do you do the right thing, or what your conscience or morals or religious guidance has you do, that you can then play Monday morning quarterback and say, well, that caused these negative consequences, so maybe I should not have done this. But that thing that you do or do not do still had other consequences. And it still puts you, from day 1 to year 10, you gain that perspective. You're looking at it from the difference of a middle school to middle age. Sorry, dude, we're getting old.
If I can give some context for the people listening, she is also a fellow outsider. That is actually why we're friends. That's how we met. She also wore all black, also went to the same clubs that I went to and hung out with the same friends that I hung into. It's actually one of my friend groups is how we actually met. So I just want to get that cleared up. So if it sounds like we're also reminiscing at the same time we're having a deep conversation, it's because we are.
So something that you brought up with that actually took me back. Do you remember the college swimmer a few years ago? On his way to the Olympics, he was accused and charged and found guilty. One of the pleas from the defendant and his father was that he was a good Christian boy. Would it have been the same if it was a man towards an unconscious man? Would they have made that same argument? They were saying everything about the swimmer's character. Would that have changed the judge's mind? He was banned, by the way. He is a lifetime ban, not allowed to compete in any Olympic sports ever, or in any type of U.S. championships.
Some of the people who made our lives a living hell when we were growing up have faced legal consequences as adults for their continual misdeeds. So I do think it would be wrong for us to paint all Christians as the criminals that we knew as kids, because I do think these people, it didn't matter if they were, I'm just saying that it wasn't that they were Christian, because I'm a Christian, you were a Christian. It wasn't that they were Christian that made them assholes. It was that they were assholes and they happened to be Christian. That's my view now. I want to be very clear. That wasn't my view from 13 to 25, but that is my view now.
Then, if that is your view, then why is it that canon law is what dictates sexual behavior? If you're saying right now that because they're assholes was not because they were Christian, then it replaced that to because they're lesbian or because they're gay.
But that's orientation, I think, is very different than choosing, literally choosing violence. So,
like choosing to be an asshole, let's say they're choosing to jump and commit violence.
Yeah.
And
so I'm going to say the guy's stupid name because it's a very stupid story. The guy, we called him Warthog. And
why do I remember this story?
The starting football team decided he had to go. He wasn't in the football team. He wasn't anything. He just was kind of a stoner and a loser. And there were stoner and losers who the football players loved. I mean, the football players themselves, by the time they get to high school, are stoners themselves. That's the other thing that's very funny about this, and it's kind of a tangent, I don't want to go into it, is that almost every vice that they would attack people on for being anti-Christian, they themselves would be participants in those vices by the time they got to college. So the same people who were gay bashing ended up being gay. The same people who were bashing druggies ended up becoming themselves drug addicts. And usually the people who were doing mild drugs beforehand ended up being sober by the time that they're adults. So most of the people that we know that were partying out when we were teenagers are now functional adults, while a lot of the more popular, more Christian, God all A's people, their lives are crap. And we know that not from opinion, we know that from seeing them and meeting them now. Some of their lives are great. I'm not saying all of them had like their just desserts, but a lot of them died in car wrecks from alcohol. They had accidents because they were driving while drunk or driving while high. They went to prison. A lot of them got pregnant early, and so they're on the female side, their lives stopped because of that. So I'm not pretending that the popular and cool kids didn't have consequences for their actions. What I'm saying is that I don't think ascribing Christianity to these behaviors is the problem. I do think that wording like Trent Horn does, and I'm not putting him on the level of these really bad people, but like Steven Anderson or James White does, I think gives license to these troubled kids and troubled young adults who have hate in their heart to take action against people who are different than them. They take someone's words like Trent Horn. Trent Horn thinks he's hiding his disgust, but in my opinion, I could see it in his face every time that he talked about the LGBTQ issues. And I think that is very dangerous to give license to unhinged people on the internet who might be either too immature or not have enough development, either emotionally or mentally, to control their own actions. And I think that is where messages like Trent Horn's cause trouble, in my opinion. Again, that's just my perspective. What did you think? You watch these videos too? Do you think I'm off track? What is your opinion of? Let's start off with Trent Horn, and then we'll go to Casey. What was your opinion of what Trent Horn said?
He goes into a lot more direct condemnation than Father Casey does. There's a lot more of you should not, you will not, or else kind of undertone to his word choice. And so there is, you cannot do this. You will not do this.
So I think it's the implications of his wording. I think it is his word choice, and I do think it's his body language and his tone, where if there's, and like I said, I used the word homophobia at the time. I'm going to use instead, if there is a disgust inside of him toward that, if there is a feeling or unsettled feeling toward the community in him, that's where it is expressed. And I think that is where license is given to criminals who want to hurt people. And I think Father Casey and Father Mike Schmidt, I know you haven't heard him, but Father Mike Schmidt and Bishop Robert Barron, and by the way, these are not liberals in the Catholic Church. These are conservative Catholics. Father Casey might be a little liberal, but these are staunch Catholics who assert the Catholic teachings. And I think they do a better job of communicating, because even though they're saying what the Catholic standard is, they're not doing it with hate in their heart. So I think you can say the standard, and you can say, look, you don't have to choose to be one of us. You don't have to follow these rules. But if you're going to be one of us, you have to follow our rules.
That right up. If you want to be one of us, you have to follow these rules. That's always been an interesting, stark difference between Protestant and Catholic, because there are so many subsects of Protestant teachings that we use the Bible, but there is a lot more variation. You called it staunch Catholic, maybe a little bit liberal Catholic. There's so much more of a wide range in how these different Protestant sects came to be. Whereas Catholicism, you have a codex, you have a canon that has been around. Within that set of preachings, should not be as much room for if you want to be one of us, you follow these rules. It's always been attached to social implications that have started to look at rules with different meanings or translations. They mentioned the 1948 video.
Let me ask you two questions, okay? And I want you to go as long as you need to go on each. The first one is, what denomination did you grow up in? What faith did you grow up in?
It's this is Protestant non-denominational.
Non-denominational. For some reason, I always thought you grew up Baptist. I don't know why. But
because if you're not Catholic in the Valley, you're Baptist.
Yeah, that's true. Now, the other question I have is, and I kind of lost the question. Let me try to get back to it. Something that was not available to us, except for maybe universalism or Unitarian Universalism, but something that wasn't really available to us when we were in the situation of discerning, is woke Christianity and progressive Christianity. Do you know anything about that? And what do you think about this newer Christianity that is more open to LGBTQ, is more open to quote unquote women's rights, is more open to woke and progressive politics? What do you think about them?
It's kind of funny because I never use the buzzwords as woke or progressive or even feminist. It to me is, religion has always been evolving. Religion itself, the context of it is there. It is the personal relationship between an individual and a higher being and a sacred being, if you will. You go through these turns of history to where, let's put it, not that long ago, the church told you if you were not willing to die in childbirth, you were not worthy of having sex, and you did not have, they say, where was it? In Corinthians, you cannot have control, do not marry. Or, if you cannot control, then you should be married. And that it says as a woman's body is not of hers, but of her husband's. So you're telling me that in that case, I should die because if the way you read it. But now, I should say, okay, let's say 2022, everybody now would look at that and be like, that's ridiculous. That is not what God wants from you. Now we have overturn of Roe v. Wade, and now that's a whole other roundabout circle. But
if you don't mind me, let me give some context for the audience here. So I actually had a live stream about 2 days ago, and this conversation came up. I was talking to a feminist who belongs to the Church of Satan. For those that don't know, the Church of Satan doesn't actually believe in Satan. It's actually more like the LaVey Satanism, where it's more political atheist movement, and it has to do with usually women's liberation or women's body autonomy rights. Usually, not always. And she said the same thing that you just said. And I'm going to ask you the same question I asked her, because I had to private that whole video because the audio quality was so bad and we had a ton of issues. Hence, I'm now using a different product. But now that progressive Christianity is a thing, and now that you can go to a church that in the title, they're calling themselves progressive, that they're saying, where they have a female deacon, where they have a gay pastor. Now that those kind of churches are available, is there a reason why you're not attracted to go back to Christianity? So for her, I'm asking slightly different for you, but for her, I asked, if your only issue is the behavior of the Christians, of the hypocrisy, well, now there's this thing available for you. Why don't you go to that? She gave a very strong answer on why she doesn't. I'm not trying to coach you on which way to go with this answer. I just want to hear from your perspective. If that's available to you, why don't you want to take that? Why not believe in God if your initial problem was the hypocrisy? If that's been solved, why not go to one of those churches instead?
Because just because you put that term on a billboard doesn't change the theology behind it. It doesn't change, this doesn't believe that God doesn't change that basic fundamental. You could put whatever word you want on it, but that's, at the end of the day, I'm not looking for a title for a billboard, a real relationship between me and any type of higher power. Those feelings have always been there, those progressive movements, the alternative definitions, the ability for, you had Deborah, who was a prophet and judge in the Old Testament. We've had women in these positions. We've had, these things have always been here. These feelings for and rights and contextual beliefs have always been there. We just haven't had a billboard for it.
And this is why I think Father Casey is not being a heretic or being blasphemous when he says what he says. And I think you and I agree on this. And I think it's dishonest what the progressive Christians are doing, because the Bible says what it says. It's there. And if you're going to be a Christian, you should not be a Christian and deny the Bible. I think that should be the hard line. I think that's why I'm friends with atheists, because if they don't agree with what the Bible says, why do I want a fake Christian in my church when I can have a real person in my life? So I would rather have the real person and have them have, what we would identify as vices or sins in the Christian community, have them be themselves, than have them go to church and then still do that stuff, but now hiding it, having it become a neurosis. I don't want that for anyone. So, that's the way that I feel. And I think that is the proper way for a Christian to look at it. I think that's very biblical. Jesus says that if you go to the town and they don't accept your message, you dust off your feet and you move on. You don't sit there and force them to convert because you personally have an ego saying, I will convert this person. You know what I mean? It's not your pride on the line. It's their soul.
Yeah, you make a very good point there. And when it's, pride is one of the deadly sins, if you want to keep going. But to them, it is not ego. To them, it is Christ-like. And so you have this never-ending cycle of hypocrisy that falls into preaching or missionary, any type of that work where you are meeting with the greatest intentions. And you have internalized that religious text. I can give you a great example that is a very heart-wrenching and disrespectful and frankly disgusting. Do you remember the Westboro Baptist Church?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
They were Christian fundamentalists, very anti-LGBT. We recently ended a 20-year war with a global war on terrorism. They went through and they protested and incited violence on soldiers' funerals, disrespected that while a Christian burial was taking place. They decided to boycott with signs saying that dead soldiers is God's wrath against gays.
Okay. So just for my audience, for them to understand why this is important for you, you are in a military family. I believe both you and your husband are ex-military. Is that not correct?
Mm-hmm.
So for you, this level of disrespect is very meaningful. You've been a soldier. You've been out there.
Absolutely.
So it isn't something hypothetical that we're talking about in the abstract. This is real.
This is real. This is you've got a chaplain sitting with dusty boots, people on the ground holding the Bible 10 minutes before you go out. You don't know who's coming back. You don't know what's happening. And you have those that have laid down their lives for others in love. And those same people who don't make it back, that have paid the ultimate price for others that they shall live. Where does that sound familiar? They then come and their families are grieving with a Christian funeral service. And you have the same proposed Christians causing not only purposeful grief, but violence in mourning that act, that selfless act, that freedom is not free. They paid the price with their lives to give those people the right to have the civil liberty of protesting on a religious liberty that they take to impute then on not only that funeral right, but to spit on the very love that that individual gave by laying down their life for those same people is the highest level of hypocrisy and lowest level of disgust that I can even attempt to wrap my head around.
Let me give an objection that I'm sure I'm going to hear a million times in my comments section. So let me just voice it to you now. They're going to say, well, that's a particular branch of Christianity. That's not all Christianity. Why are both of you blanketing all Christians and all Catholics with the wrongs of this one group of people? And to give a hard example of this, the first time I ever went against Catholic YouTube, the first time I really took an audience hit, I went up against a guy named Brian Holdsworth because he was justifying the Inquisition and he was justifying what happened in Spain specifically. And my family are conversos. My family's on a Jewish name list to be executed. That's not a joke. We're there. And my ancestors are not the good guys. My ancestors betrayed my other family so they could live. They got to come to a boat to Mexico and live as Christians here in the U.S. But they, be very clear, be very honest, they had to name names and they had to become Christian to be able to come here to avoid torture. So, or exile or whatever you...
It's not the only example of forced conversion. How are you going to... I mean, we can go back centuries for a loving and merciful and generous God of violence that has been enacted in that name. And it's not just one sect, in this case, Westboro Baptist Church. We can go back and it is not that name on that billboard. It is the perpetuation of just the duality and of how, sorry, I'm getting lost in my...
Let me kind of box it in a little bit. How is this not whataboutism? Because it's very easy to say, well, then what about the Muslims who do terrorist attacks, or what about the atheists who shoot up gay clubs? You know, like, hey, that happened. You know, what about communist Russia or communist China or whatever you want to say? How is this what me and you are addressing right now? What me and you are addressing as an ill within Christianity itself? That it's a problem with certain Christians. How is this not whataboutism?
That's a good question. People who are always, well, what about? To me, that screams deflection. You want to give credence. Somebody else is way worse than us. We're not shooting people up. We're not bombing. Look at them. They're doing this. What they're doing is worse. What they're doing, and therefore saying, but not saying. We're not so bad because of this. If you want to go back to, again, that fundamentalism, wrong is wrong, right is right. It's not a matter of what is less than what's said. And it is why, for the lack of everybody heard, why can people not understand the concept of just don't be an asshole? And that is the plainest way that I could say it.
Well, but I mean, we are slightly being hypocrites when we say that, because the way that we both rebelled in the exact same manner is that we decided that, okay, well, being mean is cool. Being the assholes is cool. And I know personally, when I'm confessing my sins to the priest, and I'm talking and thinking about where I messed up in life, my sin was not making friends with Warthog, just use the one guy I named. It wasn't hanging out with our group and being friends with our group. It was the actions I took in our group where I was treating other people like objects, where I was not living up to a moral code, where I was being an asshole, because if the whole world's an asshole to us, well, I'm going to be an asshole right back. I do think that is a fault and a vice within all human beings. Now, we can call it original sin, we can call it whatever we want. But I do think that part of human nature is there. I do think Christianity addresses it, otherwise I wouldn't be a Christian. You can do whataboutism about us. Like, people in our group have done bad things. So what makes us exempt from this problem? Or are we saying that because this problem exists, we shouldn't believe in God? Because I don't believe that. I don't believe that having problems in the world somehow means we don't need a higher power. I have personal experience and I have reason and I have a lot of stuff for why I believe in God well outside of the Bible. It isn't the Bible that got me to believe in God. You know what I mean?
It's not the Bible that got me to not believe either.
Very, very true.
And when you say, being hypocritical, where does the buck stop? And it stops with that understanding and the acceptance of the things that we have done wrong. It accepts to where we are not perfect and that we are transparent. You knew me as a kid. I found my own way very quickly. I had to grow up very quickly. I now have children who are teenagers and an adult. A big part of my parenting is the ability to admit when I'm wrong and the ability to be transparent about learning from mistakes. And I think that as a religion and as a nation or as a sect of people, instead of being transparent about mistakes, sometimes there are people who double down that are, no, we are right. And I'm going to show you we're right because we have the numbers or because we have the money or because we have the majority.
Can I ask you a tough question? We haven't done too many tough questions. We've been agreeing way too much. So let me ask you this one. And I don't want you to disagree with me. I'm curious. I'm just asking a question here. If your children decided to become Christians, would you have a problem with that?
No, I wouldn't. I would ask the same questions. Maybe not the same questions. To have this more context, let's back up. I grew up in the Protestant church. I was very involved. We'll leave it at that, as part of family being highly involved in the church. And I both left geographically and emotionally and spiritually. It was a very sharp disconnect. And so there's a passage that was frequently repeated to me is raise your children in the ways of the Lord, and as they grow, they will not stray from you. I'm sorry. It's one of those light bulb comes in and you become an adult, and that really was it for me. Did you grow it? Did they raise me in the way and the walk of the Lord? Yes. Did it stick? No. Am I a prodigal daughter? No. At that same time, I did not leave in spite of anything. I left because of. So I have raised my children without any religious influence, but I have also raised my children without any religious hate, a religious defiance. I honestly think there's also, in Judaism, there's a very definite coming of age, and Catholic, you have the same stepping of coming into aging, age of acknowledgement, age of responsibility. If my children have reached a sense of coming of responsibility and they want to explore their spirituality, as a parent, I would be remiss and ignorant if I did not support that. I don't have to agree with something. My job as a parent is to guide, not to dictate. And I'm not talking about not telling a 4-year-old not to go play in traffic. That's different. But as growing somebody to be in emotionally and spiritual maturity, you don't give them a guidebook. You don't give them a rule book. You guide them. So absolutely, I would.
So just to give, again, context, but me and Anissa, when we were exploring or discerning, I guess I should say, religion, we didn't just stick with the Bible. So a lot of times in discussions when I'm debating atheists, they'll be like, well, you've only ever experienced Catholicism or Christianity. How would you even know? So we actually spent a very good amount of time of our high school years and early college years, and I guess military time for her, reading ancient texts. We started off with the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and both of us on our own continued on with many, many ancient texts. And we're talking about translatable texts. We're talking about like academic quality texts where they had the original language on one side and the translation on the other, and they had academic notes. So we're not speaking from ignorance when we talk about ancient religions or Christianity in the Bible. I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about our theological views. I could be incredibly ignorant and not know it. But when it comes to what we've read, we actually spent the time studying and reading ancient religions. Obviously, our lives went in different ways, and I don't know how much you still read ancient texts, but I still do. I still spend plenty of time reading ancient material.
Something that, I will bring in that holds relevance is, I spent significant amount of time with the global war on terror. And a lot of people see that as Christianity versus Muslims, and there is a concept of the jihad, and there is all of that. But I had a American interpreter that was with me, and he gave me a translation of the Quran, and I read it. And I don't think that was sacrilege. I think that was a learning experience, and he did me a very good service as both, as he was a practicing Muslim, and I was grew up in a Protestant Christian church. He was showing me where things are getting mistranslated by certain extremist groups in Muslim. We have the same thing here, except they don't have the same buzzwords as jihad and extremists. We have more subtle concepts of the differences of it. But these things happen of what it actually says and what has been interpreted, and not talking translation. We're talking interpretation of these different religions. And then it comes down to making your own decisions.
I think that is actually a huge disconnect when we're having these conversations between Christians and atheists, is that the atheist will get stuck on translation and the Christian will get stuck on interpretation. And we're not talking to each other, we're talking past each other.
Absolutely.
And like, who gives a crap if Malakoi is an untranslatable term or a one-time use term? That's not the point. Mm-hmm. We have, by tradition, have been translating it a certain way. We have that interpretation, and it's that interpretation that people have a problem with. So them meaning the progressives, trying to undermine what Christianity says, I think is a huge disservice to the LGBTQ community, because you're selling them a bag of goods. You're telling them, hey, Christianity will one day change, and it's not. And I think that is a horrible message. I think that's as horrible as what some of the hate preachers say, because the hate preachers are a scourge on the earth. And I don't care if they're Christian hate preachers, if they're Muslim hate preachers, if they're Buddhist hate preachers. If you're pushing hate of another, you're probably not following your religion correctly. I have read the Quran. I have read the Hindu scriptures. I have read almost everything I can get my hands on Buddhism. So I've read enough ancient stuff and enough religion around the world that I can tell you that the message of hate is usually not in the text.
If any canon is preaching love and inclusion and forgiveness and acceptance with the condition of hating another sect or another belief, that goes directly against the concept of agape love, unconditional. There's a translation and an interpretation for you. You have pure, unselfish love, and is the basis for any type of Christian teaching. So that by default, you cannot have that hinge on you hating another group, whether that be LGBT, whether that be Muslim, whether that be atheist. If it demands that you hate me, I want nothing to do with it.
And I want to be very clear. I am not talking about condoning the sin or anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about for my Catholic audience out there. I'm not saying you go against what the church is teaching. I'm saying that you be careful who you're listening to. And if they're telling you to actively hate someone instead of actively love someone, or they're changing the definition of love to the definition that matches the word hate, they're giving you the wrong message, even if it's someone who's right on 90 other things. I'm wrong on about 100 things a day, but I'm right on this one. And someone like Trent Horn, who, again, I'm not saying he's a hate preacher. I'm just using him as an example because he's who we've been talking about. He's who inspired all of this with Father Casey. But there's another priest who went after Father Casey harder. And I'm not going to speak against a priest. I'm not stupid enough to do that. But what I am going to say is that when someone's preaching hate, straight up hate, they're not seeing the word of God. They're not preaching the word of God. They have given into a temptation, and that temptation is hate. That does not mean you condone the sin or that you're going to tell your congregation, hey, go be poly tomorrow. That's not what the Catholic Church is ever going to teach, ever. And I think that is the problem with this approach of trying to deny tradition and put everything on a literal interpretation of the Bible.
I had a wonderfully helpful professor who did a class on Judaism that I took, and it specifically went into like women of the Bible, and it was she admits that as far as Jewish scholars, that they admit that there are linguistic contradictions within the Bible, and to looking at it as an academic thing without never saying that it is wrong or right, but you can look at a collection of books that have been admittedly scanned, collected, and canonized over thousands of years in different areas of, at the time, the known world. So when they use things like, we can go all the beginning, took 6 days, on the seventh day God rest. Is that true? Does that mean the same day? Does that mean 24 hours? That was not the same concept back then. But that doesn't mean that we cannot say, yes, that was a day. That was a period of time. Don't go on the nuances.
And I want to be clear that she's not giving an atheist argument right now. You can go back to John Christensen. You can go back to Origen. You can go back to Augustine and Jerome. You can look at Pope's commentaries on Genesis. They talk about this. This is not something that Christians should be scared of. You shouldn't be scared of the truth. And that's the other problem I had with Trent's approach, is that he's so worried about the dangers to the faith. Listen, the only two things that matter when it comes to dangers to the faith is that Jesus rise from the dead and is God real. If those two things you're solid on, it doesn't matter what the Bible says or what the writer, the human writer, not the Holy Spirit, not the one who inspired the theology, what the human writer gets right or wrong, what the transcriber got right or wrong, what the scribe, because scribes have added text, scribes have messed up stuff, what the printing press that you got, the Bible you have in front of you, when it prints the wrong word in the Bible, that's not a mistake from God. That's a publisher who wrote the wrong word in the Bible. It happens. Yeah, they shouldn't threaten your faith.
If a short-sighted 12th century monk transcribing this and that careless spelling error threatens your entire system of faith,
then you don't have faith. Yeah, the problem is you.
And I think that goes both ways. I think that the problem is you, and then the problem is the entity that is so feared to get something wrong. You have to put somebody in such a straight, narrow column that you have to do this and nothing else because people are afraid, or you have made people afraid by your teachings. Because it does not inspire fear.
I want to be very clear. She's an atheist or wherever she's at, and I'm a Catholic. We're both not denying what the Bible says, and we're both not saying that the Bible is true or false or anything like that. I'm not going against Catholic teaching, and she's not like going radical on like anti-theist statements here. We're just simply saying you shouldn't let the scholarship or the facts scare you into a lie. And I fear that that's what's happening with Trent Horn, where he sees the facts and he understands that if these facts hold true, this could hurt someone's faith. Well, if someone's faith is based on a misunderstanding, and a misunderstanding is going to break their faith, they didn't have true faith to begin with. That's just how it is, man. If a punctuation error, if added text, there's Bible sections that in Catholic Bibles are squared off, and it says this text was added later. So in the Catholic Bible, there are parts that say, hey, this isn't part of the original text. And I don't see Catholics leaving the churches by masses, that's the wrong word, but by large groups because of that change. Yeah.
Every time you have a translation, every time you do this. So we were talking earlier about who were making these guidelines for, like, let's loop it back down to sexual acts, not just sexuality, to the actual acts. Those who are writing these were men not participating in these sexual acts, that were not engaging in relationships romantically, or even in a lot of cases, you bring it back, it was inadmissible to be able to have a platonic friendship between genders. So they can't even say that they had any type of platonic friendships with women.
Let me speak on that real quick, which is Bart Ehrman and his buddy Jeff brought this up, which is, and it's anachronistic thinking. People keep on thinking that the creed that's described in the Bible and the Judaism that's described in the Bible is the Judaism of today and the Christianity of today. The Jewish community was segregated between sexes, okay? Ancient Rome was segregated between sexes. Ancient Greece was separated between sexes. You had a section of the house where the women lived, and they never left the house except to get water. The men had a separate section where they lived, and they didn't interact with each other. This is not today's society. And when you anachronistically try to set today's society in biblical times to understand what the Bible is saying, you're going to get it wrong every time.
As an atheist, I'm not pushing a modern agenda of the times have changed. That is every time that anything is being added to these texts, it is in reference to something, an updated translation because of new information, clarification because customs and cultures, that priest that's standing up on that pulpit is not getting stoned to death for mixing fabrics in his robes. Let's pull it from direct translations of mixing fabrics. These are not things that are that are in theory. These are examples of human condition.
So I've talked for a long time on my channel about how the word hell and the word Lucifer are bad translations. And Jerome is one of the reasons for those translations. And I've always wondered why Lucifer. I get the Satan thing. Like, I get why Satan. I get Azazel and Baal. I get those translations. I get they're not the Hebrew words. That's all fine. But Lucifer has never made sense to me because Jesus himself is called the morning star, and you're not seeing Lucifer, Jesus right next to each other. So why this? And I saw a biblical scholar who specializes in ancient Hebrew talking about the etymology of the word and how it comes from the Hebrew and how that gets translated into a certain word into the Septuagint, into the Greek of the Septuagint. And then the Koine Greek gets translated into an equivalent word in the Latin, in the Old Latin. And that Latin is pulling words from paganism. So the reason why you get Lucifer is because there's an equivalent word in paganism. That does not mean that the god in the Latin paganism is what's being referenced there. That's not what's happening. It's not that Lucifer is the same Lucifer, so that pagan deity is a representation of Lucifer. No, they needed to pick a word, and the translator had to make a choice. There's a reason why modern translations don't have that word. It isn't that the translators being sacrilegious, is that they found a better word in current context that works better for our current culture. Now, sometimes, like with the NRSV updated edition, they make choices I don't agree with, but they've always made choices. And all these choices, every single word you see in the Bible is a translator's choice. Someone had to choose this word to be the equivalent of whatever word they're translating from. And it goes back to before the oral tradition even touches the pen to page to become the written tradition. Is there anything you would like to say? I'm going to ask you different questions, and then I want you to do the same for me. Is there anything that you'd like to say about Father Casey's video?
Something I would like to explore maybe on a separate section is his notion of, let's pick what the Bible does not say about homosexuality, and we're going to turn this box of admittedly nothing into this very formalized something. And there's a lot of ambiguity, doesn't even begin to cover it, of how he goes into certain things. And, I've got a whole bunch of things I'd like to talk about on that one, but we'll save that for another time.
Let me hit this. Let me hit that from my response to it. And this might not even be a good response. I'm doing this off the top of my head. But for me, the tradition is what we have to rely on as Catholics. I'm not talking about Protestant Christianity. As Catholics, we have a holy tradition that goes before the Bible was written. We have the Didache, we have the Church Fathers, we have Origen and John Chrysostom, and we have Tertullian. We know what the Church Fathers thought about these things. We don't have to force the Bible to say something it's not saying. And that's a huge problem for Protestants. But we're not Protestants, so it shouldn't be a problem for us. That's my note there. Okay, next, let me ask you, what did you think about Trent Horn's video?
It is a little harder to listen to. Usually, coming as this, and I'm sure your commentary is going to love me, but he almost, there's only so much pigeonholed propaganda that can be shoved into something in the name of religion.
I would love to argue with you, but I kind of agree with you, so we'll move on. What is your view? And we'll start off with the broader community, then we'll go to Christianity. We'll start off with the broader community, go to religion, go to Christianity, and then go to Catholicism. Okay.
That's way too much to remember with my age.
So what is your view of the current status of the LGBTQ movement? Mind you, when me and you were in, I don't even want to call it the LGBTQ movement, and I don't want to call it queer because that was a dirty word back when we were in this, but back when we were in the community that is now identified as LGBTQ, we didn't have those identifiers. We didn't have any of that stuff. We just knew that we could drink underage at this bar, so that's where we're going. We knew that wearing this clothes pissed our parents off. We know that listening to this music made the people that we don't like not want to hang out with us, and that was good enough for us. And also, the music was really freaking good, to be very honest.
Something that you're missing there is you're quick to point out all the things that we did to inflict a certain thing on another person. We did this to do this to another person. I think you're forgetting all the things that we did and do for ourselves. Finding people, finding relationships. Again, platonic sexual is not the point of this conversation. Finding people that have the same type of inclination to sit down and be able to communicate and be able to have conversations and meaningful connections without hate and judgment because we happen to disagree. To be able to be of something, even if it is not what is perpetuated by 99% of the population. You know, I listen to some things because I just liked that song. You know, I'm sorry, I was still blaring Juliana Theory yesterday. It's not gonna die. Why? Because I like it. And, you know, there's a lot of things that we did and do. I love who I love because of that person. I always have done that. And now we have these identifiers. We didn't have that, but we've always had the internal feelings. We've always had the connections. They've always been there. They're just now buzzwords. And I think at the end of the day, we were just trying to figure ourselves out. And anybody who says that they know what's going on with themselves, 100% is a damn liar. So, I mean, but that's just it. I mean, we do things because that's how we make informed decisions.
So what do you think about the current state of the LGBTQ community? Do you think it's healthy? Do you think it needs work? Do you think it was better when it was underground and it was like a rebellious movement? Do you think it's better now that even though it's open, it's now letting in people who are not necessarily part of the community, but they are identifying with the community? Do you think it has become a political movement? Do you think it should go back to being a social movement? And do you even think it should be an identity? Like, what is your opinion on the current state? Okay, let's do this. Let me ask it again. What is your opinion on the?
I have some really good answers, but then I keep forgetting. So,
okay. So let me just ask the first one again. Mm-hmm. What is your opinion of the current state of the general LGBTQ community?
So, when you're asking about the community, I feel like you're actually asking about the community and the general population and how that they are or are not existing in any state. So putting at a community, we're not anybody who has any type of affection or inclination or preference that is not mainstream is considered other. And in this case, the title is LGBTQ. We're not gatekeepers. This is not a, we can drink underage at this bar. Well, we can do this because we're part of the community, so that gives us license to be assholes. No, that falls under the same pitfall as a religious. It is not a concept or a license or a free pass for unacceptable hatred.
Or
That
even
doesn't
unacceptable now that we're adults and we can look back. It's not an excuse to be immature. We were immature, but it had nothing to do with us being in the community.
And these people decisions, there has always been, even as back, there has always been people who have felt that their external body does not match their perceived gender.
Do you think that we would be, considering who we were, not who we are now, not who we developed into, who we were, do you think we would be more accepted now in this current society than we were then? And do you think that would change our attitudes toward theology and philosophy and our personal identity?
When you do not have to spend so much energy defending why you are the way that you are, and instead you can put that energy into just being who you are, that takes a level of license that somebody who is, let's say, a fluent, white, straight, Catholic male has always endured. If you take that away and not having to prove myself, and others who have chosen to be more vocal and be more advocate of, I just want a seat at this table. That doesn't mean that you can slam your glass around and start throwing food because you deserve to be at that table. That's unacceptable. It's also unacceptable for the person across from you as a Christian fundamentalist to throw their drink at you as well. Why can people sit down at the table and enjoy a meal together?
So since you kind of went there already, let's go to the next question, which was, how do you feel about how religion in general, I'm not talking about Christian, as you know, we've studied enough religions that the majority of religions out there are not acceptable of homosexual behavior. How do you think religion in general, now in the current time, relates and treats those who are LGBTQ identifying in the current day?
In the current day. So it's kind of a double-edged sword because it's not as clear-cut as you would think. So you're holding the standard of LGBT towards a cisgender heterosexual married couple, right? Let's use that as our baseline. And again, all of these are buzzwords from the past. So you have a ordained marriage for procreation. They can't have children. They're not fulfilling God's promise. They no longer have sex together, which was the importance of the covenant of marriage, was to have sex and procreate. Or now two of those things are not there. Is that a valid marriage? Is that a valid relationship? People choose to not have sex. Or now we put it, to the sin of Onan, to where, he spilt his seed and God killed him for it. I think we kind of falls in the same loophole. And I don't think that you're never going to change the canon.
Let me ask you now the next level, which is, how do you feel from when we were kids? I'm not talking about like since the year 30 or 33, since we were kids, since we were teenagers and we were rebellious, and to now, how do you feel Christianity has changed? I'm talking about Christianity, not Catholicism, not Assemblies of God or whatever you want to think about, but Christianity in general. How do you think it's changed in relation to LGBTQ, and how has it changed in relation to itself?
I think now that it's the biggest change now is it's been acknowledged. We would never be having these bishops coming to the Pope asking for clarification on blessing of same-sex union. We never would have had this conversation 100 years ago. It would have been inconceivable.
Or Southwestern Baptist Convention having a split over the issue where half the church wants to bring everyone in and the other half is like, whoa, wait, what? Yeah.
United Methodists recently split in Texas. They had a vote and the assembly vote and they split. That never would have happened. And the fact that now...
And they split over LGBTQ issues. I'm just letting the audience know what we're saying, what we're talking about.
The difference now is it has become an issue. It is being recognized as an issue. It is being recognized as something needing and worthy to be addressed. So instead of even looking at it as they're right or wrong, they are now being held accountable to make a stance for or against something.
And then the last question I'm going to ask is, what's your opinion? And keep it short because we are starting to go pretty long. What's your opinion of the Catholic Church? I've never asked you that opinion my entire life. We've known each other for a very long time. But what's your opinion on the Catholic Church?
I had a problem with Protestantism and their way that they were saying that this is the way to do things. And I think that Catholicism has that on a next level, that there is not only a path, there is a crossword puzzle worth of missteps, landmines that you must achieve, or else. I've always understood it and have it recognized as you do this or else. And to me, the concept of perpetually not being threatened with internal damnation to be a good person is not the basis of a lasting good person.
All right. Now let's reverse it. Let's try to keep it to no more than 5 questions, but let's ask at least 3. Is there anything you'd like to ask me before we end the recording?
As you've grown up and you're matured, you had your set of understanding and the titles of what it meant to be a good Catholic. And that meant a certain levels of sexuality, of sexual identity, of sexual acts. How has that changed through your life, both compared to what you understand with Catholicism and your personal experience?
So my audience itself may not know this, but I've been in debates with atheists, and I've been in debates with LGBTQ people. And for those that don't know, in my teenage years, roughly from the age of 13 till the age of, I'm going to say 23, maybe 22, I identified as pansexual. And then from the age of, I guess, 22, 23 to the age of 30, I was in different polyamorous relationships. The reason for my change in sexual identity has to do with when I was very young, and I talk about this in the Kim video. I was very interested in learning about ghosts and witches and magic, and I found out all that stuff wasn't real. And that's where my studies took me. But in those studies, I also, in the nonfiction sections, saw lots of books about sex. Being a boy and being a teenager, I definitely went to those books and read everything I could on it. And I found a word called pansexuality, and I liked the word because in my mind, it gave me the most opportunity to have sex. So my goal was to have sex.
You found the book and you identified. What is it that you were identifying with? What is the wording?
So for those that don't know, I am a pancreationist. That's actually a martial arts that I've studied, I learned, and I teach. I used to be a martial artist for 15 years. Pancreation, pan means all, creation means power. Pansexual is all sexuality. Mind you, this is pre-modern terminology. I know some people still use pansexual. The way that I used it when I was a teenager was to mean male, female, and trans. That's the way that I used it. I don't know if that's what it currently means. I don't really care. I'm not in that community, and I'm not as that anymore. But in the literature that I was reading, which again was academic and well, not always academic, but mostly academic literature that I was reading and in activist literature. That was the title. I preferred that title to bisexual, specifically because I was attracted to femininity. And it's that attraction to femininity that would make me throw away that identifier by the time I was in my 20s. Because I looked at who I was dating, I looked at who I was attracted to, and realized I liked women. So having that identifier just to be part of a group seemed, if not dishonest, at least a little bit unnecessary. But there was no denying that I was in polyamorous relationships. So I just simply adopted that identifier instead. And I was in different polyamorous relationships, everything from a polycube, which was my first attempt, didn't go well. My second attempt was a polytriad, and then as that fell apart after years of being together, there wasn't a short relationship. It became an open relationship. And then eventually the open relationship drifted so much that I realized that I wanted monogamy. So before I became a Christian, before I read the Bible for the third time, for those that don't know, it's when I read the Bible for the third time that I reconverted into Christianity. And then it was from that third reading that I would eventually go back to the Catholic Church and become a Catholic. A very liberal Catholic in the beginning, I will admit that, which I didn't know I was a liberal Catholic. I just was like, hey, I'm going to go be a Catholic. But that's my history of my sexual identity. So I kind of forgot the question now, but that's where I'm at.
So something that I picked up that I'm going to call you on is you fitting into a definition is what you were saying, and how, well, this is what I wanted, so this was the tagline at the time. And that is where I think that our journeys as far as relationships, and we're talking dating and connections, so sexual acts, just as dating and connection and who you were with. It's never been a concept of, oh, well, this is what I need to, here's this term, here's something that I like the ring of, so this is what it is. For me personally, it's you are who you are, and those things, should they exist, come organically. It's not a searching, for me, it's not a searching of, oh, I want to do this, let me go find. And polycules are very difficult to maintain because what is it? Communication.
Yeah.
How many of those you mentioned about?
I want to be very clear on this. I was not good at communication at that point in my life at all. Any kind of way.
I'll put you on the spot here. How many in that timeline of heterosexual monogamous relationships had better outcomes based on your level of
my average relationship? My average relationship at that time lasted 3 dates. Okay, so it's not like things were going well. The polycube one, the poly.
Or does that speak to?
Well, it speaks to me being really shitty at relationships and not a good boyfriend at the time. I will admit that. But I've become a much better person now. Thank goodness.
You had asked me earlier about how the LGBT community has evolved. And I will fully admit that there are individuals who say, oh, this looks fun. And so I take this box and descripting and I'm going to try this. And I will never ignore the fact that there are people who want attention and who want to be controversial, irrespective of anything. And that hurts everybody.
I do think it's really stupid that we're relying on teenagers to give us our sexual definitions as adults. I think that's really stupid because A, their brains aren't fully formed, and B, they don't know what they're talking about yet. They haven't lived enough life. If I was going to identify, let's pretend that I never threw away my identification. Let's say that I stayed poly and I stayed calling myself pan. What that means now as a 40-year-old is totally different than what I thought it meant when I adopted the first of those titles at 13. It's not, I did not have a good understanding of my own sexuality, let alone what expression of that sexuality even meant.
And that's where I think we differed and call it gender, call it maturity, call it dumb luck. I have always had a very strong sense and strong understanding and strong recognition of bisexuality. There was differences on, so these buzzwords that did not exist when we were growing up, that when I was in my early 20s trying to figure out, the difference of why certain relationships were working and why they were not, and where it was the same thing being sought out. I didn't know buzzwords. So it was, now I have a definition, and in this case, I can use my definition of my lifestyle choices and my way that I communicate and the way that I perceive love and attention and affection and communication and attachments. Now there's just a word for it. People who are looking at titles is another thing that we get caught in translation. That is just, it's the same pitfall. It can be the same argument that we can go all the way back to 2 hours about.
Well, I do think that miscommunication happens because not just, and this comes from being dyslexic and knowing how this works in interpersonal communications. But I do think a lot of these problems also comes from internal definitions. So your internal definition of a word or a term or a phrase is different than someone else's. So when someone's preaching something or teaching something and they're using English, your context for those words are completely different than the next person's and different than the person who's speaking. So you end up having to make connections, and it isn't until you have enough connections that you can really start communicating to other people. And it's that necessity of communication that's so important. But you have to have a level playing ground. You have to have a common term that you guys can use, so you guys at least know you have this base. Like, this word means this, and this is what it means to me, and this is what it means to you, and this is how we're going to communicate to each other. But it takes a lot of building blocks. And I don't think the internet is conducive to that kind of communication. Well, don't get me wrong, I have made great friends who we've had that kind of communication. It was through debating with each other many, many times where we started to find out what each other meant by the words we were using. It's through years, 6 years of debating with people, that certain people who just stayed in the debate community, you start understanding each other.
This can all be summed up on don't find your sexuality from a TikTok.
100%. We're both 100% in agreement on that, and I'm pretty sure even Trent Horn agrees on that. If you can give me one last question, and then we'll go ahead and close out for the day.
What was your defining moment from when you first left? You've talked about your
When I first left Christianity?
Yes, the internal. We talked about the discussion, the chain of events, but what was the one defining thought that left, and how is that different from the defining thought of rejoining?
I realized that I didn't have the ability to control the outcome of the outside world. And that's when I stopped looking at evil as a fun taboo, as a fetish, because I realized that not only did bad actions have bad consequences, but that I couldn't force my will on the universe. It was in realizing the limitations of my will to influence the universe and to influence life that I started looking up, for lack of a better word. And I started looking at, well, what actions, and it was very utilitarian, both in my acceptance of there being a God and in my acceptance of the Catholic faith and Christianity before then. I looked at, if I behave this way, what happens? And if I behave this way, what happens? What are the results? What are the consequences of my actions? And what are the results of these behaviors? And the results of studying, telling the truth, not overeating, exercising every day, being loyal to someone, not stealing, not coveting, being generous and charitable. The consequences for those actions were much better than being greedy, being self-deluded. It just, in general, the first step was that self-realization that I had limitations and that I was not invincible. And the second was seeing how, when I tried different lifestyles, when I tried different philosophies, and this goes all the way up to my 20s, when I tried different philosophies, every philosophy and every religion I looked at, every religion or theology had a huge lie that I'd have to accept to be able to opt in. And then every philosophy had a huge negative that I'd have to allow for me to live that way. The only religion that I could not falsify and the only actions that I saw consistent positive action or positive consequence was Christianity, and specifically Catholicism. That's how I went about that process. But it wasn't a one-day process. It was a conversion that took over 20 years. You're talking about from 13 to 33. And then to the Catholic Church from 13 to 35.
You learned how not to be an asshole.
Correct. Yes, ma'am. All right. I think that's about it. Was this a good time? Did you enjoy this? What'd you think?
Yeah, this is a lot of fun.
Well, you're going to be YouTube famous now. All right. Anissa, do you have anything you want to plug? I know you're politically active. You're socially active. Is there anything that you want to plug? Anything, any organization you want to talk about? Anything like that before we start closing off?
I think the only thing that I would ever really say is that hate's not going to do you any good. The children that you are mentoring, that you are speaking to, be it atheist, be it Christian, those are the children that are in the quagmire of trying to figure out who they are. I would just say, as far as a plug of just those who are raising children, whether in Christian fundamentalism, in Catholicism, Protestant atheist, those children have, learning sexuality from TikTok. Have grace, have patience, listen, other than condemning. You know your views. Maybe just listen to see what it is they're learning before you shut them down.
I think that's a good message. Anissa, this was fun. I hope to do this again. I hope you're available some other time. I still want to do that watch together. Like I said, I did the first one of that Kim person's video as a out lesbian Catholic, outreaching to people for a call to conformity to the word. I would love to get your reaction as a former Christian to her words, because my reaction is super positive. Maybe your reaction will be super negative. Who knows?
Let's find out.
Let's find out. So it was great seeing you again. Don't actually hang up. I'm going to stop the video, but we'll talk for a little bit more. It was great seeing you again. I hope everything's going well with your family. But it was great talking to you again. And I really hope for my audience that you got to hear what she had to say, that you were not busy judging her status as an atheist, that you were actually listening and learning how these words come across to people who are not of the same mindset as you. Because that's what's important with outreach. That's what's important with apologetics. That's why I'm anti-apologetics. That's why this channel has rebranded to anti-apologetics. Because rhetoric is not truth. And the truth does not need a lie to be accepted. Peace, like, and subscribe. Talk to you all later. Have a great night.